Hey friend, Niclas here from Your Audio Solutions. I hope you are doing well and welcome to today's show. The guest on the show today doesn't really need an introduction. He's a guitar virtuoso, songwriter, guitar teacher with past students such as Steve Vai, Kirk Hammett, Charlie Hunter, and many others. He has sold over 10 million records and has 15 Grammy Award nominations. Maybe you can guess already who I'm talking about, but obviously the guest is Joe Satriani. It was a big pleasure talking to Joe, and I hope you're going to love this interview as well. Doesn't matter if you're a guitarist, musician, you just love music. I think you're going to find some interesting and useful stuff. But before we get into the interview with Joe, I want to tell you about something very cool coming next Wednesday, the 29th of July, 1 p.m. PST, so Pacific time. Live Q&A with JJ Blair, who's been on the podcast before. He has worked with artists such as June Carter Cash, and also Tom Poles, who has worked with people like Bob Dylan. So this is a free event. It's going to be on YouTube. All you have to do is just register for free, obviously, using the link below. And by registering, you get to ask your question beforehand. So if you cannot make the event, you still get your question answered, and you can always come back and check the replay of the Q&A. I think it's going to be a really cool event. It's going to give you the opportunity to ask questions to people like JJ and Tom, people who have done records for many years and who are awesome at what they do. So I'd love to see you there. Just register for free. I'll send you a link, of course, and you can write your question now. But that's it for promo. I'd love to see you next week, Wednesday the 29th, 1 p.m. Pacific time. Just click the link. But now over to Joe Satriani. Well, yeah, first of all, Joe, thank you for taking your time. We're looking forward to this for a while. And I'd like to start out our conversation because I was listening to your records, and especially the song Why on the Extremist record.
Oh,
But not only that song, like a lot of the songs, your guitar playing is very poetic. Uh, then I heard Steve Vai saying a similar comment. It was like, oh, shit, he thought the same as me. Just wondering, where that quality from your playing comes from, if you even think about it as poetic.
oh, I don't think about it like that. My writing process is that I get overwhelmed with feelings, emotions. Sometimes they're part of a remembrance or something that's, not too deep in the past, maybe very recent. Maybe I'm reacting to something that's just happened or interaction with a person. And sometimes it's silly make believe. Sometimes it's deep metaphysical pondering, and but it all gets filtered through a complete visceral, intellectual, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, moment where it's just like a complete, total being moment of inspiration.
Right.
And I've learned over the years to not to filter things out because of anything that I may have learned in the music business. Don't play that because it's not popular, or play that because someone else is succeeding by doing that. All those things that are so normal in any walk of life, in any industry. You don't want to repeat failures that you see around you.
Right.
So, but for the artistic state of mind, it's kind of counterproductive. So it took a very long time to deprogram myself into trusting what was my true nature's output, what I really wanted to express. And then just when it's done, then you can look at it and say, okay, it doesn't work for this project, let's say.
Right.
So the song you brought up, Why, which is on the Extremist record, a good example of a song that maybe didn't belong on the album. I know that when I was working, the album had 3 stages, and at the third stage, working in Los Angeles with Andy Johns, he didn't get it at all. I mean, there
Right.
wasn't that kind of thing with him. He was a British classic rock guy,
Right.
and he was completely befuddled with it. And I said, well, let me bring in my friend Bongo Bob Smith from Northern California.
Mm-hmm.
He can make this thing really work. And so while we were working on other songs, and first of all, 99.9% of all the music was done on that track by myself and John Coonaberry. What we were missing really was a guitar solo and drums, real drums. We had to
Right.
figure out how to get Greg and Matt to be part of it,
Right.
And but what it took was Bongo coming and just creating, which was then, we were just thinking it was funky and R&B. I guess people at the time saw it as a kind of an urban, early hip hop influence.
Mm-hmm.
But because we're all older, we were influenced mainly by music of the 60s. And so that's what was brought into that. But it's a good example of how it was difficult for me. Well, first of all, easy for me to sell it to myself, so to speak, because It's just, like I said before, don't filter it. If it's a good song and it's honest portrayal of the emotions that you're having, then go with it,
Mm-hmm.
But I have to sell it to musicians, producers, engineers, and then eventually the record company, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So it's a funny thing. That's a whole other interview about the life of a recording musician.
Yeah.
But it did work, because eventually me bringing Bongo Bob down to LA, having him at Ocean Way, working in a little room, and then bringing Andy in saying, look, Andy, I know this is not your thing, but look at what we can achieve with this. And he slowly started to get it. And then he knew how to look at Greg and Matt and say, okay, this is how I want you guys to interface with this early hip hop thing that Joe's got going with this lyrical song,
Right.
And then once he captured that, he sat back and he went, oh, I get it. This is a very unique song. It's not like Friends or The Extremist or War, or certainly not Summer Song. But it's got a thing to it that's quite unique. And I was very happy for that, that the end result of that struggle, which was almost like a year and a half,
Right.
finally resulted in that song, which is a fan favorite, and we still play it live, and it's
awesome.
still really cathartic for me to play that song, so I still love it.
Nice. But you mentioned being able to express what you really wanted and not be influenced by labels, whatever.
Yeah.
What was that journey to get to that point? Because that doesn't happen overnight either, obviously.
No, it's wow. I mean, just imagine everybody pretty much has those musicians. They have that moment where they're in a room with some other friends playing, and somebody says, that really sucks. You should really play like so and so. Whatever you're doing, and you feel funny. I mean, you growing up and you want to be accepted by your group and everything, and then the first couple of times you do those gigs, they're generally for friends. You're playing at parties or high school get-togethers, whatever they might be called today, Battle of the Bands. These are things that when we were in high school, youth centers, because you can't get paid for gigs. So generally the grown-ups are arranging stuff for you, to play these gigs. But the pressures are intense within your group, because, you're trying to impress your friends, you're trying to get a girlfriend, whatever it is you're trying to do. It's the whole world. You're not really thinking about the music industry. You're just thinking about your town, so that just grows. That grows exponentially. And then when you become a professional, the competition is unbelievable.
Right.
And there's always there's going to be that agent, that manager, that record company A&R guy who's going to toss these negative comments at you, like your hair isn't right, you're too short, you're too tall, you're too skinny, you're too fat, you really should be playing Gibsons instead of Fenders, you really should get rid of that amp. It's just an endless amount of, because they're paid to criticize, because they don't know what else to do. They're not the artist, so they don't think like we do, right? Just completely free form
Right.
of expression. They're just thinking marketing, which is in a way is a great thing, because the free thinker really needs a reality based team around them to say, okay, we can help you make this happen. This is where we think we can succeed. And if we do, then there'll be money for you to continue your art, you know?
Right.
So those people are extremely important to us. But the interfacing
Mm-hmm.
can be traumatic,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you've practiced, you're a young kid and you practice in front of the mirror in your bedroom and you think you're cool and you play your first gig and somebody important is supposed to be there. And then they go, we love you guys, except for that guitar player over there,
Right.
you know, with the funny Italian name. You don't like that guy, you know, he doesn't look right. And you know, suddenly you're crushed, but
Mm-hmm.
you have to learn to always rail against, you know, authority, you know, in that regard,
Exactly.
and and follow your dream. So, I mean, let's just say this. I'll end this answer by saying just a little funny anecdote is that
Sure.
when we were very close to finishing tracking, before we really started doing the overdubbing, but with the music sounded really like 90% finished.
Mm.
And all the guys from Relativity Records came out down to LA, and Relativity Records was in New York at the time. And they came to see what I had been doing. I had really taken a long time to do the Extremist album.
Right.
And, you know, songs like Why were completely finished pretty much at that time. And we played them the whole record. And there's two funny things that happened in there. So we're in this room, in this conference room. We've played them the whole record. And there's this like complete silence, like
Yeah.
after the record.
Right.
And we were thinking they were going to be jumping up and down, especially when they heard Summer Song, because we knew that that was like
Right,
a
right.
special song.
Mm-hmm.
And the phone rings, right, to breaking the silence. And Andy picks it up because he was about to leave the room. He was so upset with the quietness that was happening in the room.
Right.
And he goes, "Oh, it's Mick. It's Mick for Joe." "Okay. Oh, I'll take it." And then so I'm watching thinking, which Mick? I know quite a few Micks. Anyway, so
Yeah.
Andy starts talking to this person, Mick, right? And then all of a sudden he goes, "Oh, wait a minute. Which Mick is this?" "Oh, Mick Jagger. Hi."
Right.
Now this is Andy Johns. They did a record together. You know what I mean? They've known each other since Andy was like a teenager, right?
Right.
And it was such an odd moment. And then I went and I took a phone call from Mick, right? And I had been playing with him just within, I don't know, the last 9 months or so. And 2 years earlier, we had been on tour. So it wasn't unusual to get a call from Mick just asking questions. "What are you doing? You're in town, dinner, whatever."
Right.
So we have this conversation. And then I said, "Look, I'm in a meeting right now, so I'll call you later." So we hang up and we sit down. And then finally, I guess Andy was just so embarrassed about thinking it was Mick Fleetwood he was talking to. He was also
Yeah.
very close to. And then he realized it was Mick Jagger. And obviously, I think Mick didn't want to talk to Andy Johns at all. So there was a funny thing that put Andy over the top. And he just laid into everybody at Relativity.
Right.
The president, right, Barry Coburn, and my good friend Cliff Coltrarian, who was my A&R guy at the time.
Right.
And he just kind of laid into him how they were just idiots and they didn't realize what a great album we had made. And if they didn't like it, they could go, you know. And he left the room, and then I had to sort of clean that up
Right.
and tell everybody, like, don't worry, Andy's just very passionate about music, which was true. He was a beautiful, beautiful, super talented musician, engineer, and producer. But he was volatile. And he was a
Right.
big, scary guy, too. So when he got angry and he was drunk half the time, he was pretty scary to be around.
Right.
But he had a heart of gold. I mean, I really loved him. And so anyway, nobody would have guessed, right, if they just saw Summer Song on MTV or something, that there was all this drama that would happen day after day after day in my life as an artist trying to get this record done and trying to get it released. And it was unbelievably traumatic. However,
Right.
when has it not been? I don't know. There's always something, you know.
Yeah. Exactly.
And if it's not coming from within the industry, it's just like today, right? Natural life in on the planet is crazy right now.
Mhm.
But people are still making albums and they still have to you know, blot out the outside world when they're doing their tracks.
Exactly.
And then when they go home, they go like, "Oh my God, yeah, the world is crazy."
Yeah,
You know?
totally, man. That's a fascinating story, to be honest. But also, like, just going back to your guitar playing, like, I think, I mean, I guess there's more, but like you, Paul Gilbert, especially, and Steve Vai, you all seems to have this, the three of you have this, maybe it goes back to the poetic thing. That's the only word I can find for it, or that's what it feels like almost. And I don't know where it comes from, but you three have this tone, feeling thing. I don't know what it is really, but it's awesome, man. So, um,
Well, those guys are so amazing. Uh, I've toured with them,
mhm,
with Paul Gilbert and Steve Vai and John Petrucci. I mean, just
yeah,
a lot. We've done a lot of G3s together, and I'm never over how impressive they are as musicians. They're just so good. They can all do things that the next guy can't. They can all pretty much play way better than me. Their technical abilities are just frightening. Uh, but they all share that same thing, whereas they really want to reach people. They want to really show people how they're feeling, and they're not afraid to do it. And because everybody's unique, their personalities are so completely different,
right.
that it comes out in a different way. But I got to tell you, I mean, standing on the side of the stage at a G3 concert night after night is frightening and exhilarating, because I'm the one who's always on last, and I've got to follow these guys.
Yeah, that's tough.
And it's so tough. Oh my God, it's just like wow. But I do it anyway, just to get my heart pumping. I just
Mhm.
watch, and then it's always the same thing. We go backstage, we start to warm up, and everyone goes, "Did you see what Petrucci just did? Did you hear that? That's so amazing." And that would happen with Paul or Steve's set. It's great, and they're great performers. They also have very different ways of doing the showbiz thing, but it's so cool.
Yeah, yeah, of course, man. I mean, I remember hearing Steve Vai saying something that you helped him overcome, like to memorizing stuff. That was his struggle, because obviously it's well known you were his teacher in the beginning, but you helped him overcome the memorization of things. I'm just very curious, how did you help him overcome that challenge?
Oh, I probably passed on what I had been picking up quite recently, because when we grew up in the same town, went to the same high school, so we knew each other when we were kids. He was 12, I think, when I first met him. So, and I was just barely 3 years ahead of him. So, the turnover of information for me was fast. I'd learn something 6 months later. I'm teaching it to Steve and his friends and some grown-ups in the town. Um, what I did notice, since my mother was a teacher, my father was an engineer, they were very smart, intellectual people, and so I could see that there was a lot of intellectual work all the time going on in the house. I was the youngest of five kids. I was the least likely to follow their paths, and I was always getting in trouble in school because I was either doing you know, silly things, or I wasn't paying attention because my mind was somewhere else.
Right, right.
So, but what I did learn was the concentrating and to remove the anxiety of mistakes from screwing up your forward movement. And I think I learned this early on as a drummer,
Hmm.
because I started taking drum lessons when I was
Sure.
9, and this guy, I knew him only as Mr. Patrikas. He used to come over to the house and give me lessons once a week. And this guy was a straight ahead jazz drummer. Used to show up in a really slim sharkskin suit. He had a really cool uh, mid '60s hat on. The guy
Right.
was just really, and everything he played was swing, and every time he would sit down to show me something, he'd be very animated, and I just thought the guy was amazing.
Right.
But I realized early on that I didn't have any of that. I was just you know I didn't know that how much I was going to suck as a drummer, but I realized that whatever he had when he picked up the sticks, I didn't have it,
Hmm.
but I had to figure out a way to overcome that deficit. And one of the things I learned from him was to keep going.
Right.
And when you take drum lessons, you're reading a lot. So, he would say, look, if you screw that up, just keep going. Just don't, he wanted me to obviously pay attention to every
Sure.
note that was written. But at the same time, he said, the people who are actually that you're playing for just want you to finish,
Right. Right.
they, musicians want to play everything right,
Hmm.
but the audience, which is the whole point of being a musician, is actually wanting you to continue and to finish. So that became an art form in itself. And I realized, wow, if I could just get from the beginning to the end,
Yeah.
I'll get to the mistakes the next time around. So by the time I become a guitar player, I realized, okay, here I go again. I'm a beginner again. I suck just like every other beginner. But if there's one thing I've learned from being a drummer, for 3 or 4 years, is it's important to start, keep going no matter what, and finish.
Right.
And so I would sort of instill that in my students. Like, that's the most important thing, because when you go to play, it's really about the person you're playing for, whether it's 1 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 or 100,000. This, they're not, they're going to forgive you
Hmm.
for that note, this note, and that's early and that's late. But you got to finish, because they're dancing or they're relaxing or whatever it is they're using your music for, but they're not really following the little things that we worry about
Right. Right. Right.
so I think that was the most important part. Steve was so easy to teach because he learned everything completely every week. He was just unbelievable. He became just, a monster player so quickly, and I knew right away that he had facility that I didn't. And again, you have to remember, it's my second time trying to be a musician, so
Hmm.
I felt like this observation was an important one to see with my students, because I was teaching maybe 4 or 5 kids at the time, and I started to step back and go, wow, that kid's got it and that kid doesn't,
Yeah. Yeah.
and of
Yeah.
course out loud, but I mean, it became obvious, and I thought, wow, teachers must know that. My mother must know that every day she goes to school to teach,
Hmm.
she must be able to spot the genius, the smart, the pragmatic, the person who's,
Hmm.
like her son who's got her head in the outer space,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the art, that, and, but you never know how people are going to develop. Sometimes their qualities as musicians, certainly as guitar players, may take a longer time to develop,
Hmm.
and again, if you think that the idea is to make good music and to be able to give that music to the people around you, then all these technical things don't matter so much. And no wonder that when you look at popular music,
Hmm.
it is populated by the most diverse group of people.
Hmm.
People who play super great, people who can barely play. Just
Yeah.
look at singers. Some of the greatest well-loved singers are people who don't actually have what you would call like a good voice.
Right.
And there are plenty of people with great voices who just like no one cares about.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like one of those weird things. So for every instrument, it's the same kind of thing. You've got your drummer who can play faster than anybody that no one's interested in,
Hmm.
and then the drummer who's never practiced a day in his life that everybody loves listening
Exactly.
to.
Yeah.
So
It's super fascinating, to be honest. Uh,
it is. I think it's fascinating. Yeah.
but being a teacher, I mean, obviously you're famous for having taught a lot of awesome musicians yourself, and you are one,
Mhm.
of course. But has there been
Thanks.
any, has there been any like common trait amongst the people that became really successful at their instrument, or was there
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
thing you can see? Yeah.
Yeah. You know what it is? They have to know what they like.
Right.
I think that's it's crazy. But if a student hasn't figured out whether they like country music, blues, heavy metal, disco, whatever it is, then how every day when they practice, how will they know what to do? How will they
Right.
strive? Where will they find the emotion and the emotional courage
Mm.
to push through, the horrible sound they're making.
Right. Yeah.
Not, a little bit easier, I think, for like keyboards because, you don't really, the keyboard kind of makes most of the sound, and it's probably violin is the hardest, right?
Right.
As far as instruments go, it's just to get a sound is so hard, right? And guitar is kind of in the middle in a way because, almost anybody you can teach to strum a couple of chords and it pretty much sounds the same.
Hmm.
But once you get to real playing, then you start getting into that violin territory where you can really hear the quality of your fingertips
Right. Right.
and how you pick, and then there's the timing and all that kind of stuff. But I find it that people are extremely resourceful. I
Hmm.
mean, you find there are people out there who don't have hands who can play guitar with their feet,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we know about the so many amazing guitar players who are blind, and so obviously us sighted people really think of guitar as structurally convoluted because when we look at it, it just doesn't make any sense.
Hmm.
Same note in a couple of different places, and all. It's just really strange. But to a person who doesn't have sight, you'd think that it would be even more difficult, but it isn't because it really goes to show you that human beings, can really rally and overcome obstacles. So
Hmm.
now we're talking about teeny obstacles here, like maybe I tend to rush or I always tend to drag or, I play that note a little sharp every time, little teeny little things that aren't the end of the world kind of stuff.
Mm.
And I think all of that stuff can be, can pretty much be worked out.
Right.
You have to be able to have a good sense of pitch and a good sense of timing. It doesn't have to be perfect,
Mm.
but if you don't know what you like, you will never be able to really concentrate your efforts to the point where people will recognize that it's you. Let's put it that way.
Right. Right.
That's
Right.
the easiest way of doing it.
Yeah.
I can tell you anecdotally that I had students, there was a 10-year stretch where I taught almost every day for 10 years in Berkeley, California,
Mhm.
in this little music store. And I saw just an incredible variety of students. I probably had 60 or more students per week. Maybe half of them were our students, and this experience showed me that you'd get like a person coming in who could barely move their hands, but who had such a beautiful choice of notes
Right.
that you go, I've seen that before as being a fan of music, I know these guitar players, like you got B.B. King who plays very few notes and you just can't get any better than that, right?
Hmm.
And you have Alan Holdsworth who just unbelievably plays sheets and sheets of cascading notes and you can't get any better than that. And
Right.
you can't compare apples and oranges at that point.
Hmm.
So I started to see that with my student body that, there were these variations that were fascinating.
Right.
There were kids that would come in who could not tell if they were in key or out of key, but their fingers moved 100 times better than those other students who really had a sharp sense of key
Hmm.
and tonality and harmony. It's really fascinating.
Yeah.
I would just learn to respect variety, and very early on, and I would always just look to encourage all the good points. And if I saw something that might be a problem that I thought I could sort of, correct it early, then I would suggest that we'd work on it, and it
Right.
could be a time thing or a pitch thing,
Hmm.
structural, hold the guitar, stuff like that.
But I mean, as a teacher, how did you, if some random person came to you and it was a style you weren't familiar with, how did you get yourself up to speed to be able to teach it? How do you learn fast, I guess?
I would listen to it. Back then, it was cassettes, so kids would bring in cassettes, and they pop in Iron Maiden or whatever it is they were listening to, and I would just, I learned in high school how to listen to music and know what it was based on the distance between the notes, even
Right.
before I knew what key they were playing in, because I don't have perfect pitch, but I was taught relative pitch. So I put on we basically was, show me the exercises I ask you to do, show me the scales I ask you to learn or the chords.
Hmm.
And we'd get that done as quickly as possible. And I'd give them my recommendations. And then I'd say, okay, what song do you want to learn? And I'd always teach them, no matter how difficult it was. I teach them some part of it, because I knew that as a kid, if I just knew the first couple of notes of Foxy Lady, like that's enough.
Hmm.
I just need something,
Right.
And but my early experience trying to get a lesson from somebody was always that they would always make a judgment. They'd say, "Well, you're not good enough to play that song, so I'm not going to teach it to you." And I thought that was just soul crushing.
Mm.
So I thought, well, if I ever teach guitar, I'll never do that. And so I found myself with beginners who would bring in a Rush song. And of course, the first thing you want to say is, "You're never going to play like that.
Yeah.
Too good." But I'd say, okay, I bet there's something here in this song that you can learn in the next 10 minutes. So let's find it.
Right.
And I would listen to it, I'd chart it out, and then I'd say, okay, I know this looks like a thesis because the song is intense.
Right.
But I'd say, here's part of it that I bet you can learn today. And they go home and they play it for their siblings, or they play it for their friends, and their friends go, "Oh, that's so cool." And that's all you need,
Mm.
is just a little encouragement, so that the young person can rally all their
Right. Right.
attributes, all their talents to make it happen.
Mm.
And I'll just add, the thing is, one thing I've learned is that when you're young, it is such an amazing moment in life. There's nothing like it. I know it kind of goes without saying, but there is nothing like the focus that a 12-year-old can put into learning an instrument if they really love it and if they love what they're doing. And it could just be a riff. It doesn't, you know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. Right.
Just be that one thing that Randy Rhoads did, or whatever it is. For me, there was a lot of that going on at the time, or just
Mm.
show them little Michael Schenker riff, and it's the world for them for weeks, and
Right.
they use that as that. It helps them focus their energy, and wow, what a period
Yeah.
for a human being.
Yeah. For sure. That's awesome.
It's great.
But and this was a mistake I did when I started out. Actually, is I learned songs, but I never used my ears really. I never tried to pick out songs by ear. I always use tabs. And that actually was not the best way of going about it. So how did you teach your students? Was it only like, oh, you got to take it out by ear, or was it a mix between the two, or what was that approach for
It's a
you?
mix. Some students came with the ability to read music. Some couldn't at all. They just didn't want to even be bothered with it.
Right.
Um, and so it didn't bother me one way or the other. I was kind of an okay reader, although I started with drums and I learned how to sight read drums first.
Hmm.
I always found that reading piano music was difficult for me. And then when I started reading guitar music, I thought, well, this is even more ridiculous. It's like it's so much easier just to listen to it. But by then, I'd kind of been a musician for a while, so that was my advantage. I had a great music teacher in high school.
Hmm.
So when I was a young teenager, I was being drilled at um, all the things that a young university student would have been learning. So ear training was something we did every day in class. Like Bill Westcott, our teacher, would go to the piano and he would hit one note, then hit another, and we had to write down the interval. And every day he would
Right.
train us
Right.
to learn how to do that. And I used to take scales, write out the numerical sequence, not having to deal with solfeggio, just the numerical sequence.
Hmm.
And a card. I don't have those cards here anymore, but it's just like a little card like this.
Hmm.
And then on one side was the name of it, like Lydian dominant, and the other side was the actual numbers. And I would teach myself first on the guitar how to sing it, and then
Right. Right.
at Mr. Westcott's insistence, I would study music away from the instrument,
Hmm.
because he said to me one day, he said, you're young and everything's great now, but when you get into college or something, or when you graduate your early 20s, you may find out that you're not as good as a guitar player
Right.
as that you thought you were going to become.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that your mind can't keep developing as a musician and keep, there's nothing that can stop your brain from developing into a master musician. And That's, I swear, that's something you don't want to hear when you're 15 years
Right.
old. But you know, God bless him. He was, you know, he's waving a little flag saying, you're not a virtuoso.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
may never be one. However, up here is really the machine that matters. And so he had me singing scales, singing intervals away from the guitar. That was like the thing that he thought you have to be able to, when you hear music coming at you from one musician, a group of musicians on the radio, whatever, your brain has to say, I know what that is.
Mm.
You know, they're using augmented force there,
Right.
or no, there are 6 different scales that have that interval, and which could they be? Or, and then when you're on the other side of it, you're providing the music, you realize, oh my God, each one of these intervals, scales, and chord progressions based on it is going to have an effect on the audience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what effect do I want the audience to have? And all these scales and chords and intervals, they're my tools. So I have to learn these tools and how to use them when I want to elicit a response of joy, sadness, tension, release, whatever it might be that you're putting into your music. I was fascinated by that, so I really went to that. And by then I was also teaching, so you can imagine I'm being taught by this guy, a graduate of Juilliard, a brilliant pianist, and he's trying to teach this really long-haired kid who plays Zeppelin and Black Sabbath with his friends. And I'm really receiving this message like, this is like some Yoda stuff, this is like really important stuff. At the same time, I'm teaching this little 12-year-old Steve Vai who's just got like fingers from heaven, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I'm going, my teacher's right, because I know I don't have what Steve's got, but Steve and I both have the same brain, so we should, And then Steve, of course, took lessons from Mr. Westcott as well. He was in high school just following me by a couple of years. So, we benefited from Bill's teaching. I can't measure it. It was just unmeasurable. He was such an important figure in our musical development.
Yeah, it sounds like it. But I mean, what you said there about like learning the intervals and knowing and being able to sing them obviously in your head or hearing them and knowing which response they will give the audience, do you think that is what makes guitar players sound like they sing the notes, if you know what I mean? Because some players have that quality of like, it's not like they're singing, so then they know where to go without having to make it all about theory. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I think it goes back to the desire. What is it that they're trying to say? I know quite a few people, musicians, who really don't have that. That desire. Excuse me for a second. I just realized I didn't turn my phone ringer off. There you go.
No problem.
Interrupted. If they don't have that, it's hard to say. I've learned to respect all kinds of musicians and the way that they operate. And I realized early on when I was starting to do gigs that my emotions took over, and it was to the detriment of my performance.
Right.
And to the point where I really wasn't, early gigs, I wasn't totally present on what was happening. I'm standing on stage, friends and people in my social circle are there having a good time, partying and everything, loving what I'm playing, but I'm really caught up in whether or not I feel like I'm succeeding at transferring what's inside of me to the outside. Of course, the other guys in the band, they really don't care about that.
Right.
They're like, they want Joe to start the song right, play the song right, and finish the song right. That's all they care about, because the singer's standing there and he's hearing me over here, so he just wants the right chords, you know what I mean?
Right.
And the drummer's like, I hope he plays like with me,
Yeah.
And so I'm not chasing the guy, but and I started to realize that at home I could play so much better, and then when I got in front of people, I would suck, I would get too tense. I'd have so much energy that I actually would play less than what I could play. And it took me, quite a few gigs to get a handle on that and to to get control of those feelings and say, okay, but these feelings are important. They drive your desire to share music, to share your feelings with people, to bond with them. But at some point, they actually stop you from interfacing, and that's actually so important. You have to be able to walk into a gig, whatever it might be, and connect, right?
Mm.
Just like this interview, we have to connect with each other in order for the interview to be good.
Mm.
And so, musician, if I don't care if they're playing at a in a hospital for kids who were sick, or you're playing at a wedding, or you're playing at a high school event, or you're playing at the Tokyo Dome, whatever it is, you have to plug into that reality
Mm.
and say, this is my audience. I need to lift them up. I need to, figure out a way to, number one, get off the way I want to get off on it, but to take all the things that I've practiced, all the stuff that I've worked so hard on, and be able to use it. And then I've got to make sure I'm doing it at the right time. I've got to feel the audience. Do they really want this kind of playing right now, or should I respond to what I'm feeling in the room? This is this is what you learn from experience, and I think that is more important, and becomes the thing that is more evident in a player that can play those right notes that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a theory thing.
No.
But of course, playing the wrong note is, gets the ultimate response.
Yeah, yeah.
It
That's
does.
true. Yeah.
It's a good point to bring up right now. And I've done it at G4 clinics a lot, where
Mm-hmm.
like the last time I was doing one with Steve Vai, I said, Steve, play me a beautiful E chord, right? And he just played this E chord, and I said, okay, I'm going to play this note now, right? And I played an F up the neck on the 13th fret, and of course it sounded horrible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what's that effect to the audience? To the people attending the clinic? I said, that's a wrong note. I said, that's so strong. It's just like response in all of us is like, oh my God, So I said, and that's just one of 12 I could have played.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly.
Remember this: if ever you need to create that response in your audience, remember that, that flat 9, wow. And that's what it feels like. So I said, now, how do you feel about a fifth or a third or a minor third on top of a major chord? Or, what's the feeling difference between when you just play a sixth, or instead you play a flat 7? I said, you as a musician have to develop an opinion about this, about every note and every single chord and the way that you play it. And that's what you use in your toolbox. That is your thing, that you, and the experience that you get from doing this in front of an audience and remembering, it's almost like I remember we were at the Tokyo Dome playing with Mick Jagger, and he knew some of us, were used to playing smaller places, especially me,
Right.
And at one point he was telling us, it was a pretty big band, 11 or 12 people at the time. And he said, guys, he said, places like gigs like this, sometimes it's more about this than it is about this.
Yeah, of course.
So don't get so caught up, because he said, 90,000 people over there really can't hear, the 35 notes that you want to play.
Right.
But if you play 2 notes and you point to them, that makes their night.
Yeah,
So just
exactly.
keep that. He didn't want to change what we wanted to play, but he was just reminding us, like, this isn't the gig. This isn't like a 100 seat capacity club, where everyone's staring at you from 2 feet away.
Right.
It's a different kind of a gig. So remember to plug into reality where we are.
That's a really good tip.
It's a very good tip.
Yeah. I mean,
He was full.
yeah. But talking about wrong notes, whatever you want to call it, and having, and how that feels like, because it's something like with, let's call it like guitar shredding, right? Like going really fast, whatever that is, whatever technique you're using. because for some reason that never actually it has never really resonated with me. I'm trying to understand it more by listening to
Mhm.
different kinds of music. So I'm not saying you're a shredder because I don't know if you don't shred that much. I think
No.
what I've heard. Uh, but what are you trying to communicate when you do occasionally shred? I guess that's my question.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's a great point.
Mm,
Really good question, actually. I've always thought that it's obvious when I listen to music that the the quantity of notes elicits a response, you know, in many different ways. I'll give you examples that I bring up all the time. They're really old examples, but they work really well. Um, I used to, because people used to ask me like, why bother with technique?
right, right.
When feeling important, it's such a silly set of questions. It's so
Mm,
stupid. You don't know how to like deconstruct the question
right.
properly so that you can reveal like how silly it is. But
Mm,
so then I thought, okay, I'm just going to answer it. I'm going to say, all right, Flight of the Bumblebee. When
mm,
you hear Flight of the Bumblebee, hopefully people know what that song sounds like.
mm-hmm.
The sound of the notes makes you think of the fluttering wings of this insect.
Right.
You know, the
Mm-hmm.
way that it flies sort of erratically. It's not like a condor, right?
Right,
That's a
right, right.
whole other set of notes, right?
Yeah.
So it's this little teeny thing, and it seems to like do this and everything. So the notes are great. So you can imagine the composer just having that feeling, like, look at that bee. That. What does that sound like to me as it flies? And comes up with that, and then the composer has to find somebody to play it.
Right, yeah.
So the musician who has practiced technique is sitting there waiting to make this song a reality. And now it's, most people today have heard it in cartoons. They've never sat in a symphony hall and listened to the whole piece,
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there's more to it than just the shredding bit. But that's where shredding's really important.
Right.
It brings to mind an image, a feeling. It represents something that we have, that a composer has realized in reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we all are in. All right, let's take another thing. The famous two notes from the movie Jaws. How perfect is that, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Shredding, but what that elicits, the fear that it elicits, the unknown, the tension, the anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
is so perfect. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So uh, these elements of technique to me need to be demystified.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of shredding, a shredder, I think, if we're thinking about composing and the effect of the music on people, I would say that the shredder has to think, what am I trying to accomplish here? Am I trying to make people think of these sheets of sound? Is it like something that's moving fast so that I'm playing fast to make people feel that momentum?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's a valid way of doing it.
Right.
Also, which is valid, which is totally non-musical, is I'm going to show people how great I can shred so I can get a job. Please let me
Yeah.
get a job.
Yeah.
And the reason why I bring this up is because the very first instrumental record that I put together, it was an eponymous EP,
Mm-hmm.
and I brought to Shrapnel Records, and I got turned down because there wasn't enough shredding on it. And I
Wow.
remember,
Okay.
and I remember thinking, but there's just the right amount of shredding on it. Why would I thought as a composer, what song needs more shredding? And I thought neither of them. I
Right.
just can't find any song that would benefit from more notes.
Right.
But of
Right.
course, I was just looking at it from an artistic point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But from the label's point of view, they were thinking like, well, this guy doesn't play as fast as the Jason Becker, who's just a phenomenal guitar player.
Right. Right.
At the time, he was just freaky good. Who else was on that label? Ingve, Marty Friedman.
Mm.
I mean, these were
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
exceptional human beings, great shredders, and they weren't afraid to play all the notes all the time.
Right.
But I just into my nature because I always approached it from writing first, and I
Mm-hmm.
thought to myself, I'd rather people really notice my compositional skills
Mm-hmm.
because I just want to be playing this stuff all the time for no reason at all. I just didn't get off on it,
Right.
unless there was a direct connection. So when I found songs that I was writing that needed something really unusual technically from me, I would teach myself how to do it. It would be painful, something like there's a song on the Flying in a Blue Dream album called Mystical Potato Head Groove Thing. And that took me 3 weeks of just brutal practice
Right.
to teach myself how to something I imagined would sound really cool. And it took all day in the studio to get enough arpeggios to make that song work.
Right.
And I'm still not good at it, unless I sit down and work on it for weeks before a tour.
Right.
But that's the way that I've always done it. I always think like, if it really makes a song happen, then I'll put the time in to do it. But because I don't work in a symphony, I'm not called on to play the most difficult,
Right.
technical music perfectly. I have the freedom to really focus on expression more.
Yeah.
And I think the body of my work in my catalog reflects that pretty honestly.
Yeah, I think so too, man. I mean, another question about maybe not only shredding, but if I can say the style you're in, and let's say Paul Gilbert, Steve Vai, you guys tend to use a lot of, not a lot, but you guys use a delay when you shred. And I remember when I was a teenager, I always said, "Oh, that's probably because they want to sound faster," and I know that, I know that's not true, obviously. But
There's lots of good reasons to use delay, though.
yeah, please let me know, because I always wondered. Not, I know it don't sound faster, but what are you feeling you're getting from delay?
The primary effect is mystery and distance.
Right.
So there's no delay on my voice now. There's no reverb in this room. There's you can see there's sound protection on the walls. It's a small mixing room. So so if the people listening on YouTube, it sounds like I'm really close. Now, if I went in the other room, the larger music room, which is naturally ambient, people would be like, "Oh, he's not really in front of me. He's kind of like back here." That's what it sounds like, if they're just listening to it, right? So if I wanted to put some of that distance into a musical sound, we would use reverb to create that depth. We would use delay to make you think, wherever that sound is coming from, it's got to be someplace big because it's bouncing, and then I'm hearing the echo, so it just sounds bigger, and that's what we're trying to do. When we want to scare people with some really tight shredding, I'll bring up a song like Ice Nine. All those solos are so dry and in your face,
right?
Which wasn't my intention, to tell you the truth. When I recorded that first solo for the song Ice Nine on the Surfing record, I had a generous amount of delay on there just because that's what I was using.
Right.
And I remember leaving the room, getting some coffee. I came back, and John Coonberry had a little rough mix going, and he hit that solo so loud and so dry. I was like, "What's that?"
Yeah.
And he goes, "Oh, this is really cool. Listen to that." And I just sat there and I just listened to it like a normal person, not like the guitar guy.
Right.
And I thought, okay, I'm going to forget about some of the slurred notes, or parts where it drags, part where it rushes, all the little things that you think about as the technician. And I just thought, what does that make me feel like? And I thought, that really is exhilarating. It just, the way that it comes off, to have a guitar player come so loud and so in your face that it creates a feeling. And it was a great moment where I realized this is why the player needs to have a producer, engineer, buddy, whatever you want to call him, to tap him on the shoulder and say, "How about this? Have you ever thought of this? Like, you just did something great and you don't even know it," that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And because it's mind expanding, and you realize, wow, you don't have to just put on delay when you want to shred, like the way you said it, And so across, even in the most recent album, we've done quite a few songs where the guitar was really dry, and I was surprised that Jim Scott decided to take certain guitars and make them dry, and other guitars and make them wet. And for months I'd been thinking the opposite.
Right.
I'm fascinated by that, but always grateful that my collaborators, add that in. They add the spice that really makes the records unique.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you definitely need a perspective, or you
Mhm.
definitely help, as you said.
I wanted to add that the if your solo sucks, there's no amount of delay that's going to help it.
Yeah.
uh, but I have to say that sometimes there's a cool effect that you can play with,
Hmm.
where if you set the delay at a certain time and return, that you can use intonation in a way to create an effect.
Hmm.
Uh, we all know what chorusing and flanging is. It's basically taking your signal and detuning it on a regular basis that you set the parameters
Yeah,
for.
yeah.
It imitates tape flanging, which was the old mechanical way of doing it by having the same signal on two tape machines and taking your hands and touching the flange of the reels to slow them down,
Yeah, exactly.
and it creates an effect to the listener. They listen to it and they feel different when they hear it, and so delay can be used sometimes that way to create an effect. It's almost like it's a pedal in itself,
Hmm.
or a tool that you would use to make people think that it's more than just a guitar. It's
Right,
something else. It
right.
carries an extra message. So there are no rules. Everything's okay. You know what I
Exactly,
mean?
exactly.
I wouldn't say that. You can shred dry. You can shred with tons of reverb. Doesn't matter. If it's
Right,
good, it's
exactly, man. Do you have time for one more question, or are
one more.
we? Yeah.
Yes. One. Keep my answer short.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Last final question. So if I gave you $1 million to teach me to become a great guitar player in 4 weeks, what will you teach me?
Wow. 4 weeks. Well, we'd have to have an audition.
Yeah. Let's say I killed the audition, or maybe I
Yeah,
didn't.
before I take your money, before I
Yeah.
take your money, I'd have to make sure it was possible. Otherwise, I'd feel really bad. Well, it's still the basic thing: timing,
Hmm.
uh, ear training, memorization, and then the on-site training. Just the two of us sitting there playing over and over again would be the most important thing, because you would pick up so much just watching me play, and
Right.
that's what's so great about one-on-one lessons.
Hmm.
If the teacher's really good, is that the student just can observe
Mm.
a human who's a little few steps ahead at their game, and they just pick up. That's what kids are great at. They can pick up so
Right.
much in a half-hour lesson just watching the hands of
Right. Right.
an older guitar player. So, um,
Makes total sense.
I hate to say it'll be a little bit tougher for you because you're kind of grown up, but
Hopefully not too much.
the thing that's cool about grown-ups is that they got the brain. It's developed.
Mm.
When you're a teenager, the great thing about it is that you're so single-minded, you
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
that you don't even know what's happening around the block, the other country, the other state. You're not thinking about politics. You're not thinking about anything. All you're thinking about is, I want to play this riff,
Yeah, exactly,
and
man.
it's a beautiful thing. As you get older, the whole world is in your head all the time, and you have to learn to blot that out and to concentrate.
Mhm. Joe, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you for taking your
Niclas,
time. And
great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. It was a big pleasure talking to you and hope you, the listener, enjoyed it as well. Please subscribe to the channel. If you listen to an Apple podcast, please subscribe. YouTube, hit subscribe as well. And please don't forget to check out or join next week's live Q&A with JJ Blair and Tom Poles. It's going to be an awesome event. It's free. Just register using the link below and submit your question so you know it will get answered even if you cannot make the event. And also, before you leave, if you want to join the audio tribe, there's a link to that below as well. And by joining the audio tribe, you get exclusive access to interviews before the public, live streams, and private Q&As. It's free, of course, as well. Just hit the link below and join the audio tribe, and you get all those stuff for free. Love to see you in the community. But that's it for this week's episode. It was a pleasure having you here, and I see you guys next week on Wednesday, 29th, 1 p.m. Pacific time. See you soon.